All right, so here are the terms for today. Let me zoom in a little bit better. Oh, that's about all I can do. There you go. Hmm. All right. You guys good with this?
Nope.
No, still right now? Okay. Maybe another minute or two to finish up. How about now, Raven? Good? Sure? Okay. What's that, Brittany? Which one are you on? Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about different neurons. Okay, so I know I didn't get to talk about the neuron just yet, but these are different forms of neurons, and really just how they connect your body together and send messages and relay messages back and forth from the brain to the rest of the body. Okay, so interneurons, mostly located in the brain, they connect motor neurons and sensory neurons together, and their job is to communicate the sensory input, okay, and motor outputs. So as we're receiving, let's say, a signal from a sensory, from a sensation, okay, this is relaying this information through our sensory neurons, bringing it to our brain, where it can be processed, perceived, and understood, where we can maybe make a reaction to the stimulus. So the interneurons are sending this information from the sensory to the motor neurons, mostly located in the brain. Like I said, sensory neurons is gathering this information and bringing this to our brain to be processed. And an easy explanation, an easy example would be just sensory information. So if we're hearing something, tasting, touching, smelling, you name it, it's gathering that information and bringing it to our brain to be processed. And they call that afferent neurons. Afferent neurons. So, sensory neurons, afferent neurons, collecting this sensation, this stimulus, okay, and sending this information to our brain to be processed. Like I said, it'll be connected to the interneurons to being relayed to the motor neurons. Motor neurons are efferent neurons. They are neurons that carry information from the central nervous system to the brain to the rest of the body. So really acting as reflexes and movements, okay, voluntary movements. And they're known as efferent neurons. Again, we'll talk about this a little bit later, maybe tomorrow or on Thursday when we dive into more neurons. Okay, today I just want to talk about the nervous system, and we'll branch down into neurons, the functions, the parts of a neuron, how it fires, how this information is being received and sent to the rest of the body. But I figure we start at the basis here, okay, and understanding the different types of neurons in our body. I'm just going to erase this so I can write up on here now. What's that? You can't see it? No. Oh, I'm sorry. What is it? You just can't read my handwriting? Oh, gosh. Raven. Oh, there's a glare. Okay. You want me to close the blinds? Okay. I'll try to write a little bit better for you then, too. Is that better? Okay. All right, so again, we'll talk about these three different types of neurons probably tomorrow or Thursday, but I just want to talk about this before we move on, okay, when we mention about the parts and functions of a neuron. So the structures of the nervous system, we have the central nervous system. I'll just label it as CNS. We have the peripheral nervous system. Okay. So involving in the CNS, the central nervous system, we have the brain and the spinal cord. Okay. And then, like I said, with the central nervous system, it's just really making up of the brain and spinal cord. This is your processing system. Okay, this is how we receive certain information, let's say, from our sensory neurons, and how it's being processed in the brain with interneurons connecting to our motor neurons. What we just talked about, the three different types of neurons. So that's what's taking place as we're sensing the world around us, as we're sensing the stimulus occurring. This is being processed in the brain, being sent to our muscles to be obviously where we can react, where we can have forms of reflexes to certain stimulus. Real quick, with the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, those are the two main parts of the central nervous system. And that's what most think about. As we're sensing the world around us, how this information is being sent to our brain by the sensory neurons, how it's being processed then, where the interneurons connect to the sensory neurons, which will send this information for a reaction to a certain stimulus by motor neurons. All right, so peripheral nervous system, the other branch of the nervous system here. This gets broken down into further parts where we can understand and realize how we have involuntary movements or voluntary movements, and whether or not we have a fight or flight response, or when we're calm, when we are not stimulated, we have a rest and digest sensation, okay, where we can just kind of relax in a calming state. So peripheral nervous system contains all the nerves which feed into the brain and spinal cord. So they act together in sending this information through motor, sensory, and interneuronal. What's up, Katie? Peripheral nervous system? Just nervous systems. Okay, so we have the two branches here. They break down. So the central nervous system, CNS, peripheral nervous system. Okay, these are the two branches I want to talk about. Like I mentioned, this gets broken down into further parts. So you guys good with this? Okay, so again, we're just talking about peripheral nervous system now. And like I said, this gets broken down into different sections. So we have the somatic and autonomic. And as stated, somatic system that controls the voluntary movements. So again, reactions to certain stimulus, this is how we can react and move to certain situations. So if we're running, if we're jogging, if we are actually trying to move to grasp something, this is located within our somatic nervous system. So these are voluntary movements. So if you're playing an activity, you have to actually associate that movement. It just doesn't happen automatically. Right? It makes sense. So autonomic is this idea where we have involuntary movements. It happens automatically. You get it? Autonomic, automatic, okay? Where you don't have to think about these processes. And a good example would be heart rate, okay? Respiratory system, where you don't have to think about these processes. It just happens automatically. And from the autonomic system, this branches down into two other sections. We have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system, this is our arousal. Okay, this is our fight or flight responses. Okay, how this is actively trying to inspire our body and try to excite our body. So with that being said, this is, let's say, a fight or flight. That's a good example. And in certain cases, when our adrenaline is flowing, okay, when we are actively trying to, let's say, complete an objective, it gets the blood flowing a little bit. Parasympathetic is this calming, okay, let's just say arousal. Let's just say calming. A good example is this rest and digest. We're going through this phase where we are calmed down, where we're not trying to complete an activity. We're not getting involved in, let's say, a physical altercation or a physical activity. And we're just relaxing, we're calming. And again, these branches of the nervous system here. So this is how it's broken down. Like I mentioned, we have the central nervous system, the brain, spinal cord, peripheral nervous system, somatic, autonomic, so voluntary movements. And we have involuntary, happen automatically. And with the autonomic system, it breaks down into two other sections, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, where we have arousal, fight or flight. The parasympathetic is rest and digest, this calming part of our nervous system. So here's some examples. So the sympathetic nervous system, these are things that happen. Obviously, the fight or flight, the arousal, okay, as more, let's say hormones are being released as we're getting involved in, let's say, activity, getting involved in a sport. Our blood pressure rises, our heart rate rises, right? Our breathing respiratory system increases. We're being stimulated at a faster pace. Okay, and then the parasympathetic. So the slowing of our heart, the heart rate, slowing of our respiratory system, and how we're calming, going through that rest and digest, right? And here's just breaking down the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. So sympathetic nervous system, like I said, that fight or flight, rising to an occasion, rising to a challenge. So getting involved in an activity might be, let's say, on the football field, or getting a handoff, right, Chris? Running through some defenders, spiking the ball. And the parasympathetic is when we're calm. We're just relaxing at the end of the night. About ready to go to bed. We're not getting involved in any type of physical activity. Our heart rate slows. Okay, our blood pressure slows. Our respiratory system slows. Those are two branches, like I said, of the autonomic system. It's involuntary movements. All right, reflexes. Okay, this is a good example of just how our nervous system is reacting. Okay, how our neurons are firing to certain stimulus. Like I mentioned, once we sense, let's say, the stimulus, we have, let's say we're putting our hand down on a warm surface. This is picking up through our sensory neurons, sending this information as the neuron is firing to the brain. Okay, again, we'll talk about the firing neuron, the parts of the neuron, more tomorrow and Thursday, where this is being processed in the brain, where the interneurons connect to send to the motor neurons to react. As our brain's processing this, feeling this warm sensation, we can pull our hand off. Our reflexes are occurring, right? And our sympathetic nervous system is picking up. It's fight or flight. That we need to react to certain stimulus, like putting our hand on a hot surface. That's a good example of certain reflexes. And like I said, it's happening in a split second. Really, we're receiving this information pretty quick. And how we're processing this information in the brain and being sent down our motor neurons to react to certain stimulus. All right, and like I said, this is kind of what I drew up on the board. This is a good example of how to break this down. So if you have to write it on an exam, right? If this is a long essay question, is a good way to break this nervous system down and to explain different parts of the nervous system. So I think it's important that you write this down, or maybe take a picture of the description. And this is a great way to explain it. You might have it on a test. So again, starting with the nervous system, the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, peripheral, breaking down into autonomic, so involuntary movements, sympathetic, voluntary movements, reflexes, sympathetic, it's arousing, the fight or flight, okay, releasing hormones, and getting excited for getting involved in, let's say, activity. Parasympathetic is calming, okay, to rest and digest. It's a good explanation of that form of the nervous system. All right, is there any questions on that, guys? We good. So again, make sure you remember this. This is important information knowing moving forward when we talk about the parts and functions of a neuron, how it fires, and how this information is being processed within our brains from reactions of certain stimulus, okay, and how we're sensing the world around us and how we react to it, how it's being processed. And next, we'll talk about the parts of the brain, the lobes of the brain, right after we're done talking about the neuron, so we can realize and understand where this is being processed within our brain. All right, that's all I have for today. Is there any questions? Good. All right.